shining bright lotus.
Thank you. Okay, well, this is about differentiating wishes, aspirations, and intentions. So we're all familiar with, I wish I may, I wish I might have the wish, right? And the difference between resolve and intention. And how does all of this even work in the mind stream, in our depth? How do we bring about what it is we first might wish for, intend? So wish is largely about hope. It's an imaginal vision for one's life or some aspect of it, whether it's big, whether it's small, attainable or unattainable. Wishes, sometimes I think of wishes as being much like a whisper in the wind, you know, just fleeting, simple. But wishes can also develop into very strong desires, which may or may not manifest and can be wholesome or not wholesome, depending on numerous things, particularly different causes and different conditions. So aspirations are often considered the same as wishes, but I see them as being similar, but far more defined and enduring. Because an aspiration can persist over time, even if they might ebb and flow. There's a tendency for it to extend through time when we aspire towards something. So I see aspirations as acting as a bridge between sort of the fleeting wishes, you know, and our intentions, providing a kind of directional guide toward an ideal vision of life and events or whatever it is you are aspiring toward. So intention serves as an anchor. It's an anchor in this like ocean of possibilities, and we anchor to a single vision for ourselves. And it guides our future. It actively shapes our mindsets and our actions. So there's a clear relationship between wishes, aspirations, and intentions. So the wish or a more focused aspiration is needed to set the overall direction of a practice or a goal. For example, in the morning, we might state an aspiration to be mindful throughout the day. And this aspiration orients us in a very specific direction. So from that aspiration, the intention arises, the intention to remain aware when getting up from our meditation cushion. We can continually choose to remember, choose to train ourselves to remember our refuges, our refuge, pure awareness. Whenever attention or this remembrance is replaced by a daydream or something that takes us away from our object. So somehow or another, I don't know why I was thinking about, when I was going through this, I was thinking about intentions and aspirations. And when we took our precepts, some of us, there's a statement in there about wishing. And I've always thought about that. And so an intention in the Zen community, for example, an example of intention and action is, for example, when a Zen priest might receive inka, becoming a lineage holder, regardless of what is actually conferred, there is a certainty in the process of becoming a Roshi, for example. That individual has to have a very strong intent to uphold and live the trust of the lineage, holding, developing the teaching skillfully so they remain rooted in direct knowing and shared wisdom. So I'm making reference to Roshi here, but that also is something that each of us take on more or less as we practice, as we take jukai, as we become priests, as we just wander in the world, right? So how does intention actually work in terms of the mind stream, the mind system? And this is a teaching that comes largely from Yogacara and is part of the historical roots of some parts of Zen. So we'll talk about conscious experience to begin with. All conscious experience consists of brief moments of consciousness. They're called moments of consciousness. and these are information bits. They contain, a moment of consciousness contains a bit of information. Okay, think of it that way. And these bits of information are sorted and linked and processed more fully in the unconscious mind before they're projected into awareness, our own conscious awareness, where it still can be unconscious actually, but where a narrative is formed. So every moment of our consciousness, it is said, I can't verify this fully, but it's said that every moment of consciousness carries a conscious or an unconscious intention that is shaped by our instinct, our emotional reactions, or our prior conditioning. And so training the mind involves constructing new perspectives and practices rather than just unconsciously following habitual patterns. So neuroscience suggests that intention, whether it's conscious or whether it's unconscious, precedes all action and ultimately drives our thoughts, our emotional experience, very often our behaviors and our decision making. So lots of times we think of intentions at New Year's, we resolve to do something, a few times a year maybe, but this is going on in our depth constantly. So conscious intentions also signal to the deeper mind, our depth mind, what information we want to process and prioritize. So we have sensory input. We've got our vision, our hearing, our ability to pick up scent, taste, thoughts. What thoughts do we pay attention and what thoughts do we not pay attention to? All of these things are part of our sensory capacities. And so we have to literally sort out. We have to sort out what we're going to attend to and what we're not going to attend to. Otherwise, there's incredible overwhelm and information that we do not need, depending on what our task is, depending on what it is we're trying to do. So, for example, that's why in meditation, we learn to refrain from fidgeting or reacting to fleeting sensations, because we train our depth to not be attentive to things that are not intentionally made as our object. So when we meditate, we choose an object. There's always an object. Whether we're following our breathing or whether we're looking deeply into awareness and the qualities of awareness itself, or any other practice. So this training goes on. So intention is very critical in our practice. And intentions can be talked about from top down or bottom up. And bottom up intentions are often driven by our just spontaneous reactivity toward external events and situations, and our unconscious impulses and what our tendencies are to begin with. And top-down intentions are consciously directing the mind toward a chosen activity, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical, or all inclusive. So the question becomes, how much are we actually in control of our mind? And can we achieve our goals or our intentions by sheer willpower? And while we often believe we can force our mind and our body to submit to our will, this is not entirely true. And we just have to look at nature, the rest of nature. You know, for example, we cannot force a flower bud to open. But we can help, depending on the circumstances, where that flower, where that plant is growing. We can help create, set up the right conditions for its blossoming. Right? Similarly, working with the mind requires patience. It requires the right environment. Forcefulness and rigid control are not effective. Intention, just intention, is not enough. And we often will blame ourselves in different ways because we have not been able to force ourselves to bring something about that we believe we should be able to. Right? So there's a lot of patience that is involved with intentions and bringing about what is intended. So we inform the depth mind. And by the depth mind, what am I referring to? Largely, I'm referring to our emotional brain, our emotional system. It's deep, it's unconscious, it's prior to narration, it's prior to story, and it's focused on feeling, which I'll talk about a little bit more later if I still have time, right? Yeah. Okay. We inform our depth mind of our intent, and we condition it. we continue to condition it until the various mental processes that are taking place in the depth align with that intention. So our thoughts, emotions, perspectives, and actions can then follow. It's like, think about rearranging a universe. That's what's happening inside of us. All of our senses have whole families, so to speak. Chuladasa calls them subminds. And, there's a lot of organization and reorganization that takes place when we put an intention into the mind stream. It's no different than like move your couch. Then what happens? What happens to the rest of the room? Everything moves, pretty much. Right? It's the same thing with our mind. So this is something to check out, but I have come to see that in many respects our intentions are shaped by causes and conditions. Something to contemplate, including necessity, emotional investment, cultural influences, and social expectations. So at 5 years old, I was given a pair of lace-up shoes and I had to learn to tie them. It was time to go to school. Those were the conditions, right? And I still recall the inability to do so. I still recall struggling with my fingers, trying to work with these laces, and now, right? Training. Training. So intention has to do with something called volitional action, and it has everything to do, when it comes to the Buddha Dharma teachings, with karma. So Buddhist teachings describe volition as the force behind intention, responsible for organizing mental factors. Again, the families I'm referring to that all exist in the mind to actualize a goal. And it's linked to karma because it reflects the ethical and moral dimensions of our thinking, what we say, what we do, how our emotional experience influences all of these things. So a teacher, Tashi Tsering, explains, once feeling is present, intention moves our mind in a certain direction. Intention is the factor that actualizes what feeling has initiated. If the feeling generated upon contact with an object or person, thing, if the feeling generated with contact with an object is attraction, intention moves the mind and then eventually the rest of us toward that object. If there's aversion, it moves us away. So that's why mindfulness training emphasizes recognizing primary feelings of attraction and repulsion prior to any kind of verbalization. I call it just a primary feeling that takes place before other feelings such as feeling lost or adequate or, whatever feelings might arise. So intention in our meditation. What does that actually look like on the cushion? What does this actually look like? So I'm going to review the whole elephant path. How's that? Very quickly. So we begin. We intend to sit down and establish the capacity to remain sitting and to be quiet, or to know the mind or quiet the mind. Stage 2, we intend to appreciate when the mind returns to the intended object. Stage 3, we intend to develop awareness of distractions while we're still maintaining panoramic awareness, focused on our object, aware of when we fall off our horse, so to speak, or whatever. Stages 4 to 6, we intend to cultivate a relaxed and yet vigilant, introspective awareness. We know what's going on inside of our body. We're aware of what's going on outside of us. We haven't lost our ability to stay connected. We haven't dissociated in any way. Stage 7, we intend to recognize the very subtle accomplishment when our attention and our awareness are stable or stabilizing and are effortless. And 8 to 10, we continue to intend, and eventually we rest in equanimity, allowing our effortless capacities and mindfulness and intention to actually form into a real habit and tranquilize, yes, the stress quite naturally. Anyway, now here's the thing, and we all need to take this to heart. It takes time. It takes time for intention to show up in our behavior, especially when habits are deeply ingrained. And depending on what conditions a person is in, we don't know what each other, is dealing with in life. We might, there's a lot of self-judgment that goes on, and there's a lot of other judgment that goes on. We don't know what somebody is dealing with. So this points to why there is a 4-path model that way back the Theravadins talked about. A 4-path model for enlightenment, because it takes time for our intention toward wholesome existence, toward our mission statement to be actualized, right? It takes time for all the forms of greed and hatred and delusion to progressively weaken and ultimately, be eliminated. So our depth mind has to integrate fully this intention before the results that we often want quickly can manifest in our mental, emotional, and physical activity. And the last thing is, until conscious drivers, impulses, all of the unconscious forces that literally drive our behavior, the mind will often experience confusion because there's different intentions competing. So we want to keep our intentions clear and simple and personally meaningful, emotionally meaningful. And that will help accelerate the process, because when our heart is truly engaged, transformation can unfold much more naturally and expediently. So thank you for listening.
Shining bright lotus.